So everybody's had a chance to see the sign, so they know they're in the right place. There. So anyway, I guess I'll introduce myself before I go into this slide, but I'm Greg Monroe. I work for a company called SolarWinds, specifically the SolarWinds MSP, managed service provider side of thing. I look after their marketing site. Been doing Drupal stuff in various capacities since Drupal 6 was shiny and new. I decided to do this speech because this year just had a whole bunch of security things for me. We had, in particular, GDPR. SolarWinds is a big international company. They hired a third party to make sure we were all GDPR compliant, so I had to do GDPR security reviews, a lot of things along that in terms of security. We've had, of course, everybody had Drupalgeddon, the Drupalgeddon 1 and 2 of this year that came out, the code changes that you needed to push out right away. And the other one is we've had a couple or 3 or 4 persistent denial of service attacks. And so when I was thinking about something to do a speech at Drupal Camp, I said, I've done a lot of security stuff, and so I'll put this together. So I put the proposal first to Drupal Asheville. So this is version 2 of this speech. And when I got accepted, I did a big gulp because the scope of what I'm going to cover is fairly wide. So I'm going to be kind of moving fast and not going too deep, but I've tried to keep it between, things that a DevOps can use down to things that just people that run their own Drupal site could use here. So some of the stuff may apply to you, some of it might not apply to you. Kind of pick up what you can, and I'm pretty sure it'll give you a full server down to individual user overview here, and lots of modules and stuff like that that I've thrown in here. So that said, why should you care about security? This is kind of a little graphic I put in here. A lot of things, ransomware is big in there. Not just maybe ransomware in the sense of your site being held for ransom, but somebody hacking your site and delivering ransomware. Talked about GDPR in the intro there, privacy laws. GDPR has some teeth behind it. You could lose up to 20% of your European revenue if you do things wrong in there. One thing that I like to point out too is the hired hackers. It used to be, I have to worry about if I did something and anonymous got mad at me, they're going to come after my site, or a specific hacker has to be mad at you to come after you. Well, the hackers have monetized their skills now. And you can go out on the dark web and actually hire a zombie network to do a denial of service on somebody you don't care for and not have to know anything about it because you just hire the service. You can hire a hacker to try to hack into a site and deface a site. That's the other thing that's important to think about, is not just, normally you think about somebody hacked my site, they defaced my site. That's not true anymore. What they really want to do is get access to your information. There's a stat out there that says a valid set of email, first name, last name, general information about a person can go for like $1 a person. So, if you take SolarWinds email database, which fortunately isn't on our site, it's on Marketo, I think we've got like $1.5 million worth of that. So $1.5 million is something somebody's willing to do that. And there are various ways you can do that. A lot of people will hack into a site and put things in place that are hard for you to see, so they can, basically put stuff in front of your form. Your clients fill out the form, they send the information off, and then they submit it to your site. And you don't know that. You don't know you've been hacked. So they're trying to put shims in there. So that's all reasons why security, making sure your Drupal sites are secure, is very important. So some common threat vectors I'm going to talk about here are the server attacks, so people who are doing denial of service, and I'll cover all those a little bit in depth. Code attacks, things like Drupalgeddon, contrib bugs, all that sort of thing. The other two that people tend to forget about in the Drupal world is just plain user attacks. People phishing or social engineering in there. And finally, in larger organizations, you do have to worry about internal attacks. I'm not sure if it's true, but a story I heard was that Target, who had their data breached, was breached because a person got a job, part-time job in the accounting department, and got access to more information than they should have, and then turned around and sold that. So, that's an example of an internal, short-term contractors maybe out to get money in other ways than you're paying them for. So anyway, let's dig down into server attacks. As I said, that's your distributed denial of service attacks, wide number of computers. It could be a wide number of computers. It could be, we actually had one of our minor denial of service attacks was self-inflicted. We had used PayPal in the past to pay for events, and somebody had set that up to actually go to a URL on our site to tell people that it was originally supposed to go to a bit of code that would track who had paid and generate a list. Well, we had changed services in there and everybody had forgotten about it. But then finance decided to allow PayPal as a way for people to pay for our services. So what happened is, anytime the bills came due, everybody who was paying for their services, our services from PayPal, was paying for PayPal, and then PayPal was turning around and said, well, you told me to ping this URL. And so and it also happened to end up in an event, a list of all our old events and stuff. It was basically a page that took a long time to generate. And we were actually causing our server to have so much load it was having problems through this. And it acted like a denial of service because it was coming from the various PayPal and other places in there. So, so there's many variations of denial of services. If you look at your logs, you probably will see a whole bunch of nuisance probes. There's lots of people out there that are like /wp wordperfect.login.php. Microsoft does the X auto discovery for exchange services and things out like that. And just, in general, 404 requests are using part of your, Drupal is having to generate those. So, those are not major attacks, but those are performance drains in there. Lot of crawl bots out there that go and wander through your entire site. And so that's eating up your resources as well. And sometimes they can be misconfigured and present as kind of a denial of service, hit your site so fast that you can't respond to your normal customers in there. One thing that people think SSL, as long as I see that little lock, I'm secure between here and there. That's not true. There's actually been a whole bunch of different vulnerabilities found in SSL where if people can capture the packets going between the browser and the site and they're using the wrong kind of encryptions, they can be decrypted. So it's not, it's not as secure as you think it is there. So what do we do about some of these things? Well, basically, I start with tripwires. So you want to be able to identify when you have a problem to begin with. And then I'll talk about that a little bit more. Layered defenses. Basically you're trying to, as the golden rule says, every time Drupal has to generate a page using the Drupal engine, that takes up a lot of PHP resources, a lot of your server resources. So by layering things, you can keep people from actually using that server resource there. And then a brief thing about secure HTTP headers, which I'll kind of skip over because it's not my best cup of tea. So this is, just showing kind of your traditional, your different ways that people might have their server set up. And there's variations on this, but you've got the traditional enterprise, and the size of the arrows there is kind of to indicate that if I'm using a CDN and something like a varnished cache, a lot of my information is being served straight back from that, and each pipeline is getting smaller as it goes down. If you're a traditional small site where you've got a GoDaddy site or something like that, you don't have as many layers in there And then one of the things I'm going to talk about here is it's easy to take the traditional small and for zero cost add Cloudflare into the mix and get a lot of the same, basically the same services that the traditional enterprise has. And there. So just some context in terms of different ways that people serve stuff. So tripwires. My number one thing is to have uptime monitoring. Because if you have something like a denial of service, or basically those resources are being used to the point where you can't deliver a page, you want to know that. And since I mentioned Pingdom here, and I said disclaimer, SolarWinds owns Pingdom. That's all I'm going to say about that. So anyway, you also want to craft your uptime monitoring so that you're going straight to the server and not just testing that, Varnish is up or your CDN is up in there. Generally, you can do that with post requests. Posts generally have to go straight to the Drupal engine to be processed. So the nice thing about our environment actually is Acquia fronted by Cloudflare. And so as a good recent example, I was driving down here Thursday and my phone starts saying, Pingdom alert, test by post is down. Well, I knew that I didn't have to pull over right away because that basically means, okay, I'm not able to generate new pages, but all my existing pages, which are usually like your home page and stuff like that, are cached in the CDN, and people are going to see those for a long time before it has to go back to the server in there. So, and then fortunately it was it ended up being a misconfigured bot that would hit into a place where they were do a lot of things and then go down. So my phone would, we're down, we're up. We're down, we're up. So I continued and drove down. I was going to stayed at Greenville before coming here, and when I got to the hotel, I dealt with that. So anyway, tripwires. The other way you can look at things is disk usage. A lot of people do that just for to make sure that editors don't upload too many things. But if you look at the logs, if you're getting a denial of service attack or something that's hitting your site very frequently, you'll see that the logs go from a million records or 10 million bytes on a file size to 180 million bytes in the access.log file size. So if you can monitor how fast your log file is growing, or put anytime the log file gets above this size, send me a note because something's going wrong here. We also do this because they fixed it, but Drupal 8 had a bug where caching would basically start expanding the cache SQL table. And it actually once got to a point where it stopped our server because we had no space in our SQL. So by doing that, we actually we don't have to do it anymore, but we used to have to go in and truncate the table and clear cache and truncate the table. CPU monitoring, looking at the 403 errors. Log analysis tools. One of my favorites is there's a simple one called goaccess.io. The nice thing about that is you can pipe the current access log and you can do filters and pass it into that, and it gives you it's more of a console level tool, so it gives you nice graphs about who are the top IP addresses that are hitting your site, what are the top URLs that people are hitting. A lot of nice information that can do things. Though of course I'll go through an example of a denial of service response, but understanding grep and pipes. And if you're a Windows person, you don't have to go, I can't do this Unix stuff, because you can download Cygwin or Baboon. There's lots of ways you can get Unix commands into the Windows world. And if you're a small site where you don't have direct access to the logs, you can usually they give you access to download the logs, so you can download the logs and then use some of these tools to analyze the log in there. And then the final one is when you're starting to identify who the suspect players are, I find the abuse IP database is useful. That's basically a place where you can plug in an IP. It'll tell you who it's registered to and whether or not it's been reported as an abuse site before. So my kind of rule of thumb is if it's been registered as an abuse site too many times, I may just go into our system and block that IP altogether. So Cloudflare, this is one way that you can go from a small site to being a enterprise quality site. It has low cost. Basically, you can have a free, there's a free version that is fairly full featured up to be honest, we're running the SolarWinds site on the $20 a month version. That's all we need, and it does everything we want. So you can go up to like the $5,000 a month enterprise, but the good thing is it's free to get started. It also supplies free SSL, so you don't have to go out and buy SSL certs. They will supply those for free. They're part of the SSL everywhere movement. It gives you a CDN, a regional CDN. I call it light because it's not anywhere like Akamai or Edgecast or even CloudFront, but it does pretty good at cutting down, putting things like images and JavaScript files closer to where your client is loading things from. It gives you built-in world-class protection from a lot of hacks. As I'll point out in my response, it's got an easy way to shut down denial of service attacks. Page rules are sort of, think of them as loosely as HT access rules that you're putting out at the front end of your web server. You can do things like, oh, well, we shut this site down and we want everybody to go to this site. You can actually use Cloudflare to set up a page rule to say, every request to this site now goes over here, or individual pages, that sort of thing in there. Downsides, they have to be your major DNS server. So, some organizations may find that hard. They've got, a strong internal DNS structure, and they don't want to say, let's take SolarWindsMSP.com and pull it off our controlled DNS servers and stick it on Cloudflare. But for most clients, that's probably not going to be a big issue. The other thing is that it's another layer of cache. So, like I was saying, the JavaScript is cached, images are cached. You can actually cache HTML in there, but there's some issues around that. You have to be careful with that. So, you can say, oh, well, I just put this new PDF file out. Why am I not getting that PDF? Why am I not getting the updated PDF file? Oh, I need to go to Cloudflare and clear that URL because it's cached in Cloudflare. But given the benefits, that's a minor thing. Quickly, some traditional alternatives if you want to do Cloudflare are things like using CloudFront, Edgecache, Varnish, HT access rules to block, and using the various Drupal things like configuring cache, fast. Those bottom two you probably should turn on anyway, or deal with it. So this is some of the new slides from the last time I did this, is because we had a denial of service response between the last time I did this for Drupal Camp Asheville and today. And so, what happened was Pingdom started ringing on my phone that the site was down in there. It took me about 10 minutes to get, I was actually at home, so it took me about 10 minutes to get logged in and start checking to see what's going on. We use Acquia, so I can actually go and do like the equivalent of a tail of the access log, and you can pretty quickly kind of see, oh, this thing is, if you're doing a tail of the log and you're seeing the requests come in and out really fast, okay, we're getting a lot of hits. The other thing you can do with Acquia and anything generally is to check the CPU. If the CPU is really, really high, that's also kind of an indication. So then I knew I needed to dig down a little bit farther, so the very complicated, but I keep it around to cut and paste in there. This basically goes through and takes the access logs, and like this is Zulu time, so 0508 Zulu time, we had 26 requests come in. 09 we had 14. Oh, wait a minute, 399, 162, 160. So you can kind of see by doing that, which of these doesn't look the same in there. The one thing to notice when you do this, it actually sorts it by time, so you need to be able to kind of figure out where in that whole list of results you actually are in terms of Zulu time. Well, it depends. Most logs do Zulu time. or Greenwich Mean Time if somebody's old school. So, so anyway, the second part of that is, okay, well, yeah, I know I'm definitely under a denial of service attack. So Cloudflare has this wonderful, I'm under attack mode. So basically I went out to Cloudflare, I turned that on. What that does is, you've probably gone to Cloudflare sites and gotten the little pop-up that says, I'm determining whether you're a real person or not. Please stand by. And then after a couple of seconds, it'll go to the actual site. Cloudflare maintains IP addresses that are suspicious. For instance, when I was doing this for my hotel, the last driving down and dealing with that, Cloudflare did a bunch of capture stuff that I had to do because it's a hotel, it's a public Wi-Fi, and so it was really suspicious of me logging into Cloudflare or doing something with Cloudflare. So anyway, but the other thing is, once I kind of, within 5 minutes, that basically cut out all the bots. So all of these requests here, so if then basically I went and said, okay, where's the problem coming from? And this is just a short example of the 38 IPs here, all from 42.120, which by the way is China. So, we're hitting not constant there. They're spreading the load out. It's distributed. This was 38. We actually had one slightly older that was about, I think, 480 IPs were hitting our site in there. Now, if you didn't have Cloudflare to turn on the under attack mode, this is where you basically kind of have to decide, how can I shield myself from these particular IP addresses? So, you could go down and modify your HT access rules to just drop information from that, because Apache and Nginx are really good at doing things like that. If you have a firewall, you might have to do it in your firewall. That depends on your mileage may vary depending on your setup.
There's a couple of modules that allow you to do that. How do you think about it?
The trouble with that is that that's still Drupal. Yeah, you basically want to stop it as far upstream as you can. So if you think about that picture of where the things are, Yeah. So there's basically you just kind of have to, if you deal with this, it's good to kind of have a plan in place. How would I take a list of IPs and block them most efficiently in there? HT access rules are a good place. As I was saying, Apache is really good at dropping people. You have to go to your Drupal and use actual Drupal. So some stuff I pulled out of our HT access are the left-hand column is basically a bunch of bots that identify themselves as bots, and we just tell them go away. There's some of them are supposed to honor robot.txt.exe, but I don't trust that because they seem to come back quite frequently. Looking at your nuisance attacks, you can also, the right hand is kind of some, if you see people doing auto discovery and stuff like that, or things that are commonly coming up as 404s on your site because somebody has decided to always ask for that, you can put a rule in at the Apache level, and so it never gets to Drupal. It just drops it, gives them a 404, so it goes, go away, don't bother me in there. Posts, this is actually part of that PHP or PayPal attack. In this case, there was a post coming into what was an events URL. So the quick way to stop that was to say, they're always hitting this URL. Just don't allow any posts to this URL. So, and you can actually play, I'll talk about it a little bit later, but you can actually play games with that to improve your security through HT access in there. So.
We have a lot of WordPress URLs.
Yeah, I mean, it's a common, apparently it's an easy hack if you find it, so they go around. SSL tools, that depends on how your server is set up. And these slides these slides are available now on the site, and I've got other place you can get it from SlideShare. Anyway, the SSL Labs has a nice thing you can go out and test how secure your SSL security or setup is. Whether you're using bad, broken encryptions and things like that. If you're using Cloudflare handles all that. So basically, this is the response for our site from Cloudflare, and we get an A+, which is actually better than I think Google or Amazon. I actually checked Google and Amazon, and one of them was like an A. So, for whatever reason, if you're not using Cloudflare's, once again, SSL is kind of underscoring. You should have all your sites on SSL for security reasons. There is really no reason for cost anymore. There's basically the Let's Encrypt Google, and I forget, there's a whole consortium of people who set up this Let's Encrypt site that you can actually get free certificates and set up things that kind of automatically update your certificates and things like that. Another site that's good if you are into having to configure your own servers is the SSL server config. That's probably more of a DevOps type thing, but it will actually, I should have gone to that but basically it will help you tell you what's good and bad if you cut and paste the way your SSL configuration is. And I think it makes recommendations into the arcane SSL setups that say, oh, if you're using TSL 1.1, use these encryptions, but not these, or preferably drop TSL 1.1, and some of the things. I personally prefer to go to Cloudflare and let them worry about it. So, sorry, I don't own stock in Cloudflare. SolarWinds doesn't own Cloudflare. I'm just a big advocate. So, I'll kind of skip over this really fast because there's a whole bunch of headers that you can return with your responses, and there is a security header, or there is a security kit module that helps add those to your site automatically. My main takeaway from doing this is I haven't turned it on yet because there's lots of gotchas, and I haven't worked my way through all the gotchas there. If you do want to learn more about that, the bottom URL is a site that kind of explains what these are. So, all right, moving down to code attacks. Obvious stuff. Get your security updates. Monitor. Get security updates in terms of get notifications for security updates. Have a plan that you commit to. If it's a Drupal Geddon type thing, a plan to update the code same day. Or look at them and say, oh, this is a mitigated circumstance, so I can wait a couple of days in there. But don't just ignore them in there. In terms of schedule reviews, if you do custom coding and stuff like that, and other things, make sure, review the update report to see what modules are out of date. Do peer reviews on code in there. And generally update your modules regularly. If you have to maintain the rest of the stack, the web server, the varnish and all that stuff, also make sure that's up to date. Now, you may not, in the case of a lot of people, you may not have access to that, but at least you should know to maybe talk to your service providers and say, oh, for instance, like with SSL, if you test your server and the SSL rating is kind of low, that's when you might go back to your service provider and say, hey, what can you do to fix this? Because they're the ones controlling your web server in there. So, the important takeaway is if you can't control it, figure out who does control it and bug them until they fix it. Or make sure they're thinking about those things as well. Other code attacks, this is kind of a little more in-depth in there, but like Drupal core, subscribe to the alerts, contrib modules, make sure that you're keeping up to date. One thing to note, especially on Drupal 8, is that if you're using dev modules, which unfortunately even after, a year and a half plus that Drupal's been out, there's still some places you have to use dev modules. But dev modules will not show up in the update report, so you actually have to kind of go out and figure out what version you're running, whether or not the dev version has been updated, or more frequently, whether or not a release has been made that covers the issue that is why you're using the dev module. So then you can migrate out of the dev to the release. The other thing too is, preferably, I only use a dev module at the if very rarely, because I tend to try to prefer to say, okay, well, if there's something broken, find the patch in the issues. With Composer, you can actually specify what patches to apply to release modules. So then you can use the release module with a patch. The only downside of that is that anytime a new release comes out, you kind of have to go through and say, oh, okay, does the patch still work? Does the patch still apply? Do I need to take it out, or do you need to update it in there? So, more on code attacks. Custom modules. Somebody could do a whole speech on that at some point or another, but general rules: use the Drupal APIs, use the form APIs, because those are the ones that have gone through security. Use the render arrays. Don't go writing your own markup and sending it out in there. Preferably go through Twig, because Twig has some stuff. General rule for any web application is sanitize your output in there. Secure your database queries. Preferably don't just code in select, so to, use the Drupal API, Drupal view API in there. The other important thing is if somebody shouldn't be doing something, I've seen so many custom modules that have like admin screens that they just say, I'll fill in the permissions later. Always check that you have permissions on admin routes. Always check permissions when you're displaying content. So, if you're going out and gathering a bunch of nodes, make sure that the person who wants to get that has the right to see that node in there. And sometimes that's more than just is it published or not published. Preferably, if you're doing custom coding, you really should do peer reviews of the code in there. And when you're doing a peer review, you should definitely say everybody should look at it from a security point of view in there. And the URL at the bottom is kind of Drupal's, what I found in the Drupal docs that deals with security. Not very heavy, but at least it kind of points you in the right directions there. So, and stuff that I already talked about is keep everything up to date in there. And if you don't control it, figure out who does control it and make sure that they keep it up to date. So, user attacks. That's things like phishing and people trying to social engineer access, brute force logins, a whole bunch of stuff along those lines.
What type of two-factor authentication would you suggest? There are some.
Yeah, actually, coming up on this, Google has a TFA two-factor authentication module that's free to use because it uses the OTP, I think is the standard, which is time-based rather. So anyway, I'll cover that. This is kind of the overview here too. Is protect your site. A lot of times, you can set it up so that if you're not like an e-commerce site where people have to log in, make it so that when people go to the www site, they can't log in and somebody has to go someplace else. I'll talk more about that. Implement good user management practices. I'll talk more about that. And enforce strong password policy in there, which is kind of a takeaway from, you think GDPR does not involve, it's supposed to be all about data. Well, no, it's about securing data. So that means that even, anything that customers can access in order to kind of help you be GDPR compliant, you have to have very strong user policies. And you have to be, it's to keep the lawyers happy. So if somebody sues us, the defense attorney can't, or whoever's suing you can't go and say, well, if you were using two-factor authentication, this would have happened. So, but it can be a pain, but it is important just in general. But anyway, the two-factor authentication here. If you go through and you have to kind of get the README download the TFA and go through the README, and I found it kind of confusing at first, so I won't go through all these steps, but this is my quick install. There's some modules you need to install to support it. Then you have to create like a random key in order to do that. Then it's basically taking that key and setting it up through the keys module and the encrypt module to set that key up. It's not that hard. It's just you got to get the steps in order, and it's not very clear in the instructions. Then you need to go to the TFA modules configuration page, and when it says select desired, they have validation plugins. The only one that really, I haven't checked recently, but the one that I use is the Google authentication module, which you can use with Google Authy or Google Authenticator or Authy, or I think it might even work with the Microsoft Azure or Microsoft. Basically, it's anything that supports the OTP, where you point your thing at a barcode and it syncs up with your site, and then when you log in, it asks you for the number, and you go to your phone and it tells you the number to use. So, and then ultimately you decide, do you want to require, you can actually set it up to where people can require stuff. I will warn you that at least at the time that I wrote this, when you set it up to require, you see how many times can you log in before you get denied access. And the way that they have it set, the way they've written it is after you hit that limit, you're denied access and you can't set up two-factor authentication. And unfortunately, I think the only way to undo that is to go back in and do a database, to actually go in and change a setting in the database there. Or I think you maybe, as an administrator, be able to set up a two-factor authentication for somebody, but that's hard because you got to get their phone from them. And so, hopefully they're replacing. I know there was a thread that people were trying to change that to where, if you don't have two-factor authentication, you can go set it up, but you can't go anywhere else, which would be the ideal. So, and in terms of user setup, once you have all that turned on, you need something like Google Authenticator Authy. You log into the site, they go to their edit profile. There's a new security tab up there. And this doesn't show the barcode, but the first time you get there, you will see the little, QRC code that you can point your phone to. I think it also gives you like a number you can use to copy and paste. And you don't necessarily need a phone to do this, because you actually are, like Google Authenticator and stuff, you can actually run on a PC if you want to do it that way. Personally, I loosely recommend Authy because you can manage multiple devices with it, and it backs up your code. If you ever lose your phone with Authenticator, you have to set everything up. So, So anyway, user attack tips. One of the things we did to our site is we said, why should people be able to go to your WW site and log in? We really have we don't collect user data there. All of our forms are Marketo forms. And you can set up, basically use firewall, host IP, HT access. We did it with HT access rules here. And we set it up so that you have to go to a different host name to log in. So it's not perfect security, but at least it keeps all the people that say, I'll do www/user, get a login page and try to go from there. Now, if you go /user, you get a 404 in there. And so the way we set it up, I won't go through this. I'll basically point you to this URL for speed. Truth in notification here. This is actually an add-on to require login that I wrote. That there's a module called require login that if you turn it on when you go to a Drupal site, you have to log in before you can do anything. This add-on sets it up so you can set that up, but then say, if you're coming from www.solarwindsmsp.com, just let them through. If you're coming from someplace else, like our edit site URL, force them to log on before they see anything. And force them to log on with two-factor authentication before you get anywhere, which it also helps a lot of stuff. It helps mitigate like any kind of some of the admin hacks and things like that, because, oh, if somebody goes /admin special thing that's supposed to break Drupal, they'll get the login screen instead of that. So anyway, I guess I'm not that far out of time. User management here. A good reference, you're not going to use, most people aren't going to be able to go back and change their distro, but a useful reference is the Garter distro. If you see Mark Shropshire, who's here, tell him thank you, because he's one of the maintainers of that. There's a bunch of modules that you can use, like the login report will give you a separate page that says so-and-so logged in here. Login security lets you block accounts. I think it also shows things on the screen when you log in. You last logged in from this IP, so if you see a strange IP or something like that, you might catch it. It's recommended for security reasons that you have something that says authorized access only. There's actually kind of an infamous case where I think Great Britain refused to send a guy to the US who had broken into a military computer, but the military computer did not have any notice that said for official use only. And the British law states that you had to have something like that. So, an easy way to do that is we use Bootstrap. So I just basically put a block with a Bootstrap modal on the login page. So it comes up and says, if you're logging into this site, it's, the standard legalese about, you're going to be monitored. Don't log in if don't belong here, or all that stuff in there. Limited number of concurrent sessions. Some of these stuff has come out of like our GDPR security review. They recommended that you don't want to be logged in at 5 different devices, or so if you've got an administrator and they may be logged in at home and at work, and a third person breaks into that account with session limits, you'll get a notice. Everybody will get a notice that there's a new session being asked. Do you want to close this one down? So it's basically a way to tripwire somebody who might somebody who might still have a login or something. Automatically log people out after inactivity. That can be a pain. We had to fight with the auditors. They initially said 15 minutes because they were thinking they were coming from the OS point of view, from the Windows point of view. If you haven't moved your mouse in 15 minutes on Windows, that's fine. But on a web app, moving the mouse doesn't reset the timer. So we got them to let us, on web apps, bump it up to an hour, but you might want to go bigger than that if you... But just in general, having timeouts is good. If somebody steals your computer or something like that, it's another way of knowing that, after so many hours, they're not going to be able to pop open a browser and have access. Define strong passwords. Once again, this is kind of Windows-based, and you can take or leave it in there. And you can do this with password policy module. I can't remember why I said use the dev version, other than I think it had a nasty recycle bug. Basically, there were conditions that would cause it to loop if you got in the wrong place in there. But so anyway, so you can go through and set all sorts of rules with that. The one downside that they haven't fixed is that if you're an admin, there is a permission right now that is, do not apply security rules to this role. And if you're an admin, you automatically get all of those rights checked, and you can't uncheck them. So the people who really need to follow these rules, you can't enforce them with this. There is an issue, and I think a patch out there to remove that permission in there so that it applies to everybody, but it's just a little hole in the security there. Okay, internal attacks. We're almost done here. Obvious things, limit permissions. Don't just give everybody administrative rights. Peer reviews. If you're writing code and other things, peer reviews is probably the best way to do that. Don't let things be set up so one person can compromise your site in there. This one is actually pretty good. It's kind of a pain sometimes, but it's actually pretty good if you have a lot of contractors or other things, as you can set up. You can use the user expire and set up. So if somebody hasn't logged in for 30 days, they're blocked. So, if you don't, as is normal with the world, the Drupal administrators are usually the last person to know when people leave the company, especially in a large company. This helps with that, because if they haven't logged in for 30 days, chances are they probably may not be at the company anymore, so they shouldn't be able to log in. And of course, don't share user accounts in there. Don't just create an admin account and give it out to everybody. This one's a little harder. Protect your data. How do you limit access? Sometimes people have like the views to CSV module put on there, and that has some permissions. So you don't want it to make it easy, so somebody could go and say, let me create a view for the user table and download it as CSV onto a USB drive and go sell that. So, and then, you need to set up a schedule to monitor logs to make sure there's no unusual activity in there, which kind of brings me to the, one of my final slides here is, you need to have security is not something you can just set up and forget. You really need to make it part of your whole process in there. If you're dealing with clients, this is, a lot of these reasons in here are good reasons to potentially get your client to pay for a maintenance contract or some other way that you can agree to keep their site up and running here. But basic rules are, define areas of responsibility. Who is going to be responsible for updating the server configurations? That may be the GoDaddy people, but at least you've got it written down as to who you need to bug, or who you need to ask if you need to find out if it's currently up to date in there. And yeah, it's to kind of combine the 2 points there and there. Define an audit plan. Say, maybe every 6 months we need to go through and make sure people are still aware of these things or that they've been doing their job in there. And part of that audit plan is, define who the auditor is. It doesn't really help to say, hey, Mr. Security Admin, you need to audit. You self-audit. Self-audits are who guards the guardians type of question there. And I think that might be, yes, the last one. So I didn't go too far over. So question, the slides are available on the Drupal, the camp site. I have added them today, or you can go search for SlideShare. It should be searchable by now in there. Make sure you get the DCA version. That's the latest one. You can actually tell that because I like to use old maps for my background. So the Atlanta version has Atlanta, the Atlanta version has Atlanta down in the corner there, and the Asheville version has Asheville in the background. So, and if you need to get in touch with me, there's my Drupal.org. So,
for a while, we were seeing a lot of the slow connection style attacks, and just putting Nginx in front of Apache as just as a endpoint, basically an SSL endpoint that would turn folks around and proxy back. Have you seen more effective solutions to that don't require?
Yeah, not well.
In context where Cloudflare wasn't an option for
Yeah, I can't really answer that because we use Cloudflare and so we just never see that kind of thing in there. But I think that is a common thing to have. I mean, the other reason for putting something like that in front of there is Nginx is a good proxy server. It basically can do the same things that Varnish does. So, you could also, if you're going to do that, you might as well go ahead and cache some of your content there and get both benefits. So I know it was a little bit of a fire hose. Hopefully you guys found something you took away from this, learned something new, validated something old.
Oh, that was great.
So, okay, well, thank you.